Hello? Hello, can you hear? Oh, there we go.
Sounds good.
So I do a bit of an intro.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. We really weren't sure if anyone was going to turn up today. We normally get slightly more than this, but I think summer holidays hasn't helped our cause, unfortunately. But we're really lucky to be joined by Keith Buchan today, who's TPS Skills Director. He's going to do a bit of an overview, general update on the various pathways to chartership and professional development routes offered by the TPS. But really the focus today is on questions from you guys. And we've got some panelists who's going to join the discussion for that. But start thinking of your questions, because we're hoping that's going to be the majority of the discussion today, because we really want it to be most useful to you guys. So I'll hand over to Keith.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm very glad to be here. This is actually the start of a TPS tour. So you're the first date of that tour. I obviously haven't got quite the attraction power of Taylor Swift, judging by the evidence of the numbers tonight. But anyway, we are seeking to get out into the across the UK and talk about transport planning skills, because this is what I'm mainly concerned with nowadays. And I think it's important to say that we're still in that stage in the transport planning profession when we're still trying to get the full respect and the recognition that we obviously think as transport planners that we deserve. And there's been quite a few sort of changes, I think, in recent years, particularly following up from COVID. And I think we need to set out the full possibilities, the full range of the skills programs that we have on offer. And I know sometimes it can seem a bit complicated and a bit difficult, so I'm going to try and address a little bit of that in my introduction, and hopefully we can deal with that during questions. What I'm going to do is I will try and be as broad as possible. So I'm assuming that whether you're at the very, very start of a transport planning career, or whether you're thinking about getting chartered, or indeed, I think there's definitely at least a couple of us who are chartered already, then I'm going to cover the full transport planning landscape. So apologies if some of it seems a bit redundant, you know a bit of it already, but I'm going to try and give you the proper overview. So what am I actually going to cover? I think a little bit about what the difference is between having an academic qualification and a professional qualification, what it really means. I want to also try and lay out as I've said, the breadth of the pathway. And I'd like to try and address, at least in passing, some of the things that I think hold people back from seeking a professional qualification. And I've literally taken these from conversations I've either had or secretly overheard. It's often the case that people think that this whole process is much more difficult than it really is. It is difficult, but it is possible. I hope I'm going to explain this. It is possible to go all the way through the transport planning qualifications. Sorry, you've got it. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay, fine. I'm going to try and say that this is a much more accessible process than perhaps you imagined. And finally, I'm going to say a little bit about, obviously, I'm TPS Skills Director, so I'm going to say a little bit about TPS. So I kind of start, I wanted to put this up because it seems to me people don't fully understand what being a professional is. And I make no apologies for putting this up here because it kind of runs through everything we do. It's the core of building up respect and recognition, which I think is the most important thing. People sometimes say, well, it's not for me being a professional. I'm just an ordinary working person. But I think it's important to say what being a professional means. And as I list it here, it's deploying knowledge. It's having a code of ethics. it's keeping up to date. And I think that's going to be followed up really with my next slide, which is, well, okay, what is a professional qualification and how does it differ from an academic one? So I think, obviously, if you do a degree or a master's, it's kind of a snapshot of what you know. But a professional qualification is rather different. It's about not just what you know and how you deploy your knowledge, it's how you do it. It's conduct. And it's not just a snapshot, as I said, it's a continuous process. And that's why we talk a lot in professional terms about continuous professional development, the dreaded CPD records. But it's important. And a meeting like this is part of everybody's commitment to that continuing professional development. And it's important also to be a member of a professional body. And obviously, I'm from TPS. There are plenty of them out there that you can join, but they all have something in common, and that is they have a code of conduct and they validate that conduct through your membership. So it's important. And to end up and say, yes, it may seem a little bit old-fashioned, but most professional qualifications have some form of review. Okay, we do it over Teams nowadays, but it is an individual review. And almost by accident, what we're finding, of course, in transport planning, as with other professions like engineering, that review process is kind of a guarantee that we are seeing the person, that we are seeing what they have done, and that we can assess it properly. And other qualifications sometimes have more severe difficulties in terms of AI writing, etc. I don't need to go there. If anybody's used it for summarizing meetings, remember that plenty of students are using it to actually write their essays. Okay, so I wanted to just touch on that. I'm going to talk a little bit about history, because I think it's important to say this is all quite recent. Now, for some of you, 2007 might seem a little, prehistoric, but it is relatively recent in the world of transport of professional qualifications. And this is what we did in when TPS was first formed, in fact, in 1998. One of the first things we did was say, well, we haven't got a professional qualification. We've got to have one. To have one, you have to create a set of what's called national occupational standards. So we did that. That took about 3 years. And then we were ready to launch two things. First of all, the high-level qualification that was equivalent to CEng, and that is TPP, the Transport Planning Professional. And secondly, at the same time, to launch a scheme which would support people in their journey towards that qualification. That's the Professional Development Scheme. What TPS did was said, can we have a partner to help us work through this? For the Transport Planning Professional, CIHT, well, it was then IHT. For the PDS, people thought it would be too difficult, so we run it on our own. That does create a slight difference in governance of the two items, but they are entirely consistent with each other. We work closely together. There isn't as they say, a cigarette paper between the content. So it's important to say that. But of course, there's been an awful lot going on. In particular, we've had the development of apprenticeships. Now, this is going to become increasingly important in our world. In fact, it's already important, because whereas the old route into becoming a transport planner might be you've got a degree in geography, maths, physics, philosophy, whatever, then you'd come on to a training scheme or perhaps a master's course. You'd come onto the PDS and then you become a transport planner. Well, lots of things have happened with the apprenticeship levy on firms. That money is making a tremendous difference to the way companies and indeed local authorities are approaching recruiting the transport planners of the future. So we started off with the level 3 BTEC level apprenticeship. We now have the degree apprenticeship, to go with that. On the PDS side, it's evolved from being just a kind of graduate training scheme into its own qualification, an intermediate qualification. And of course, now through CIHT, we have the chartered title available for TPP. So there's been a lot going on. It sometimes looks a bit complicated and a bit difficult, and I will mention some of the complexity a bit later on. But basically, this is what we have evolved, and that leads me to say what we have now is a real pathway from the very beginnings at level 3 BTEC apprenticeship all the way through to the TPP and chartership. And this landscape is very, very important, I think, because it gives us the complete flow through, as I say, from apprenticeship all the way to chartership. And I think that's, it hasn't happened by accident, is all I'm going to say. It's intentional that there would be this level of consistency all the way through. And it means that if you're starting off as an apprentice and you're doing project work and you're recording your learning or you're doing or whatever it is, then that will become useful to you, not just in your career, but in terms of your professional qualifications going forward. Okay. I will say one thing about the pathway. I've set it out here. It looks, because it's a diagram, it looks kind of rigid. With transport planning, there are many points of entry into this pathway. You don't have to start at the beginning and go to the end, because I'll explain a bit about how it fits in later. But you can do an MSc and enter into the pathway. There are different ways that you can do this, and there are all sorts of transport planners out there. But it is important to say that at least we have a consistent pathway, a landscape of professional qualifications exactly the same as if you wanted to be an engineer or a planner or an architect. Okay, I'll get a move on. Here we go. I wanted to give an example of consistency between the middle bit, which is the TPS, PDS, and the TPP. The read across here is almost, it's obvious and complete. I hardly need to really comment on it. The difference between the intermediate qualification and the high level qualification, obviously, is the level of competence. So you might need to have knowledge as a minimum for all those units on the left. But when you come to the TPP, you'll be expected to have worked in those areas, to have full experience of those areas, and that you can give evidence of that experience and your skills. So it's a difference in levels of competence, but the point is it's translatable, it's movable, it's consistent. And that would be, we have a map, incidentally, for the apprenticeship ones. I'm not going to show it because it's a bit more complicated, but we have a map for all the apprenticeship content, the elements, what they call it, knowledge, skills, behaviors, both for the level 3 and the degree apprenticeship. And indeed, we can run the professional development scheme concurrently with the degree apprenticeship. Okay. So I thought what would just be handy would be to kind of talk a little bit about what these things actually look like and what they are. So I put up the first two here. I've mentioned the PDS before. It is portfolio-based for knowledge and experience. In other words, you have to have record sheets. It's got web-based support, employer-based mentoring, final review. That includes a presentation with questions from the reviewers. And at the end, you can get the TP qualification. Of course, the top level qualification, TPP, very similar in a sense. You've got a portfolio of technical knowledge, which is then assessed first. Then you have a portfolio of evidence, which is essentially your experience. You write it up. And then that is subject to a final review, exactly parallel to the PDS system. And if you're successful in that, you get the TPP qualification. A little note here, the TPP for most people is in two parts: the knowledge, what I know, and what I did, which is the portfolio of evidence. If you do the PDS, it meets the knowledge requirements. So at least you don't have to duplicate that part if you're going for the TPP, which is, again, something that is designed into the system to make it flow better. And finally, of course, we now have the chartered title, which everybody that's got the TPP, which is the qualification, can, I think, is pay a small fee to CIHT and you get the chartered title. So we now have a chartered qualification. On the apprenticeship, it's a bit more of a mixed picture. It's currently delivered here in Leeds. When I come to Leeds, I don't come to this bit. I go to the Leeds College of Building. To get there from the station, I have to cross several motorways, I think. But they are delivering the level 3 BTEC. It's regulated by Ofqual, so it's got a high-level government regulation, and it's integrated with a professional qualification, which is either EngTech for people who want to follow an engineering path, and TPTech for the transport planners. So that is there. It's assessed through an endpoint assessment. Again, written portfolio, review, presentation. So this is, I hope you're seeing a kind of familiar pattern here. And again, if you do the TPTech route, if you're on transport planning pathway, a lot of what you do can be written up as part of your PDS journey, and in turn that will lead to TPP. Degree apprentices is slightly different. The government decided that it would have a mandatory professional qualification for the BTEC, but it would definitely not have one for the degree. So that means all the endpoint assessments for the degree are done internally by the university, regulated by a different body, the Office for Students. Professional bodies don't actually see what's happening in the universities. So what we try to do with the PDS is to offer it concurrently with the degree. So if you do a degree, the apprenticeship degree, you can now work with the university and the PDS and TPS to deliver your PDS. So you will get an intermediate qualification at the end of the degree course. There are two reasons for doing this. One, it's absolutely daft to have people with 8 years transport planning and a degree and no professional qualification. Doesn't make sense. The second thing is that as professional bodies, we need to ensure that the people coming through are getting taught the breadth of transport planning that we need. And by working so closely with the university now, we are hoping that this will be a way of, in a sense, getting a lot of positive feedback between the existing transport planning professionals, the new educational provider, because the degree is providing the degree apprenticeship is a completely new thing with new tutors. It's been designed virtually from scratch. It's important that we, I think, are involved in it as closely as we possibly can. So I think that's again a pretty interesting example of how we are trying to integrate the professional work that we do with the academic work. Okay, I'm going to finish by just mentioning this. What about an MSc? Okay, now when I started in transport planning, the main way into transport planning was to get a transport planning MSc, because, well, to be frank, we didn't have the TPP because I was a transport planner before 2008. So, tremendously respected route, and a lot of those places that delivered the MSCs, like the University of West of England, University of Westminster, UCL, all these places were also centres where transport planning research was undertaken. They were centres of excellence for transport planning. So although in some ways, having the PDS and going through the TPP is a kind of might feel like it's competitive with MSCs. In many ways, it isn't. It's different. We need the centres of excellence, and also the MSc can fit in with the transport planning pathway. We've been very careful to do it. So if a university puts up its course to the TPP governing body, it can have its course approved, and then if you do that MSc, you won't have to do part 1 of the TPP, the PTK. So you can avoid a PTK either by doing the PDS or doing an approved MSc. And similarly, if you wanted to do the PDS and you've just done degree MSc, you can sign off all the knowledge parts of the PDS, and then there'll be a small number of experience record sheets that you need to complete. So again, that's an advantage, that if you've just gone degree MSc, get a job, fine, we can fit you into the PDS in that way. If it isn't approved, and they're not approved because they're rubbish, they're not approved because they're designed slightly differently for slightly different purposes and don't cover the whole of the TPP requirements. So if that MSc is delivering parts of what's required for TPP or PDS, then we can map those modules to the technical topics and sign those off. So that's important. And I think that's going to be important because what we are seeing now is a decline in numbers for full-time MSc students for transport planning, which is quite a problem because it's undermining those centres of excellence that I talked about. But what we can do is, when these modules are offered as courses, which is what's happening, in order to keep them going, say, take the appraisal course or take the policy course and offer that, then we can map those individually to bits of the PDS. So we are working on this. I don't know how relevant the MSc is to anybody, but I want to be absolutely clear that that pathway is still one that's very important to us all. Okay, so to finish up, where do we go from here? As I say, if you're a level 3 apprentice or thinking about it, TPS can help you, advise you about your TP Tech and what it is, how you get it, etc. If you're a graduate fresh to transport planning, as I say, it's now a mixture of graduates and apprentices we're seeing, then we can help through the PDS and INC-TP. If you're more experienced, then we can talk to you about which is the best route for you, because sometimes it will be a PTK, a different route, and we will offer advice. And again, if you are going for the TPP, again, both us and CIHT will find mentors to help you through, because I think in 10 or 15 years ago, professional qualifications, people said, oh, here's the guidance, get on with it. That is not the way that we want to do it now. And that's why, again, if you think any of the things that I put up in the first slide, there are barriers to getting a professional qualification, basically talk to us, because we can support you. Okay, I think that's about it from me. I hope I've covered at least some relevant ground. There was quite a lot of ground to cover there. And I'm going to hand back to Imogen on the panel, I think.
And I'm also going to stop the recording, because we are open to all questions. Daft questions are fine. So I'm just going to leave the meeting, actually.